Hello? Okay. Well, thank you very much, Cosmin, for introducing us so kindly, and thank you all Parasite, all you people, Anqi, thank you for having us and organizing everything. Bear with us, we just heard 3 hours ago that we should say something as well in this panel, so in between makeups and entertaining, and we try to, yeah, give you a decent summary. So basically, Savi Contemporary was founded in 2009. Here in the back, Bonaventure So being Dikung did found the space in the heart of Neukölln in Berlin. And I would say it was created out of this desire that many of us want to write our history ourselves. And so since Berlin, despite this vast art production and cultural spaces, there are not many places where people from the Philippines or Congo or wherever are treated as artists. So in a way we said, okay, we need our own space. And so we started in a very small space, I would say 80 square meters, and had all kinds of formats, be it performance, exhibitions, reading. So the story went on. We moved already now to our third place. Basically, to give you a short summary, Savi has 4 pillars. So we heard already Colonial Neighbors, which is an alternative archive attempt to collect objects that are connected to the colonial past of Germany. And it's not about adding to this fetish, this narrative of what colonialism was, but it was more about thinking about the background of these objects in order to collect bits and pieces of this collective memory in Germany, how they're still connected to it, not to point a finger back and talk about colonialism, but to point a finger like to the future, where people would point back to us and think about us, like collectively denying other people right of mobility and so forth. Then we have the Savi Doc, which is very different in its nature. So it's about, we have a library. It's about accessibility. So we try to digitalize parts of our library to make it accessible. We have opening hours, so such and so forth. Then we have the performance department, where we also say, of course, that the body is a very crucial side of archive, if you want to put it like that, of learning, knowledge production, but also unlearning. And the fourth department pillar is the design department. So in 2016, we started to think of forms or formats, how to break this narrative, that Areal, Times New Roman, Futura was there from day one. So we said, okay, if we include this in our program, unlearning, unthinking, decolonizing, we can't leave design alone. So and Elsa, since she kind of like worked in this field of design, we started doing seminars, decolonizing design, if you want to put it. And maybe you want to start talking about
so good evening, everyone. Thank you as well, to Parasite and to everyone for these really generous presentations and sharings of knowledges in all sorts of forms. I'll try to kind of summarize very quickly what the Spinning Triangles has been so far. Maybe also I would like to acknowledge again, even though this has been done in the introduction, the non-presence of 2 of the people from Kinshasa who were meant to be here, Zinzo Anza and Nyoni Masela, because presence is always kind of part of what the present becomes, and as they are not here, it also makes a difference that is, I think, important to point out. So, unfortunately, we can't hear their voices much, but we've tried to make an effort to sort of transfer via WhatsApp messages, etc., what has been happening here in the last days. So this is kind of probably like a positive thing that technology can do to share. Yeah, so, and also then of course there are some team members from Savi who were part of this project as well, who are woven into this even though they're not here, and I would like to say hello because we're like live, hi, to Arlette, Antonio, Raisa and Lily, who've been very much part of this. So yeah, to talk shortly about spinning triangles, we had, so it's, as Cosmin already said, like 3 geographies kind of triangulating in this conversation, Dessau, Berlin, Kinshasa, and Hong Kong. And actually, there's this kind of strange mirroring happening because like in January we made the visuals for this project, so also for Hong Kong, and our visuals are often quotes from the concepts. So I would like to read this because it's kind of like become a mirror almost to the situation here. And it is in this split between a founding moment and a catastrophe where we need to sharpen our ears. So thinking about this now in this relationship to Hong Kong is sort of like, has weirdly become like a double meaning. Yeah, and but originally in the concept it was to point out at this sort of catastrophic moment which the idea of progress, which is also embedded in the Baos and entangled with it, produced. Like so. And this is also, I would say, probably like the node or the beginning point of this project. In what way is design tied to this? Because it's our everyday, it's everywhere. Almost all our environments in some ways designed, and they have become sort of this vehicle for this kind of catastrophic modern moments, or at least in its Western conception. So maybe also quickly talking about the process of what we did was really we started off in Dessau with a sort of miniature clone of the kind of famous iconic workshop wing of the Bauhaus building over there, and it became like a 2-room apartment that we inhabited for 2 weeks and a bit more, and became also a space that was private and public at the same time, where because of its kind of iconness, people were very attracted to it, and therefore, came to us, and then it sort of transformed into this kind of Trojan horse, because they were expecting maybe some kind of celebration of the Bauhaus, but then had to meet discussions about embedded racism in Dessau itself, and issues of colonialism entangled with the idea of modernity. So that was kind of I don't know, mousetrap, Trojan horse, something like this. After Dessau, I mean, maybe something important about Dessau is also that we participated in and made a workshop with Mukhtar Ba from the Uri Jallo initiative, because actually one of the darker sides of Dessau is that 14 years ago a Sierra Leonean refugee died in a police cell there, basically burned alive by the police officers. In this case has still not been solved, and there are demonstrations every year, so we felt that it was in our that this was part of that this is also part of this discussion that we need to have. And so design not only as this kind of bad actor, but can maybe also put out messages out there. So after Dessau, we went collectively to Kinshasa after, of course, also long discussions with actors over there, and organized a kind of, something like this international conference, so this kind of congregation between different practitioners and thinkers who talked about education, about how to build spaces, pedagogies, and also, again, this idea of the body also not only as a site of discourse, but as also discourse itself was a very important element there. So we had people like Saki Mafundikwa, also Cosmin, of course, Emma was there, Simon was there, Koyoku, Tabitha was there. So it was really like a broad range of people from all over the world who congregated. And we also had 1 week of workshops, and then discussions among all sorts of people to also talk about, okay, what if we were to create a school of design, and this in quotes, then what could that be? How would that be practiced? And so this is actually still going on because, you know, like somehow this kind of started something that, yeah, has not really found something like a form yet, but it's in discussion. So, and it's continuous, which is one of the beautiful things I think in this project, that it sort of like is this continuous starting of things, and we will see where it goes. Yeah, and then in Berlin, we activated a school of design at Savi, actually, which we could also call an unschool, where 40 people came for 4 weeks. So you can imagine the challenge also of this. A lot of things happened really between people and, you know, in the making and in the thinking. And yeah, I guess when one takes this unlearning process actually seriously and tries to do this with 40 people in 4 weeks, it's not only a pleasant kind of experience, I think, you know. So I think, yeah, this is something important also. This is not just, unlearning is not something necessarily nice. Yeah, now we're in Hong Kong, and for us, this is kind of like a further opening of all of these discussions. And it's been just, yeah, as I said before, we're just really happy for all the generous presentations and sharings.
Because you mentioned unlearning, which is an important, I think, principle at the heart of Spinning Triangle, and it's really like one of the, I think, driving principles. But it's also like part of like a longer project that Savi has been working on. So maybe it would be good to share about that.
So as you said, like 3 years ago, 2016, we started this long-term projects and also curatorial approaches about unlearning. And just to mention, for example, one format, like Arlette, who can't be here for visa issues, is she initiated this year a program that's called Telling Trees. And it's a program that was initiated, which is composed of a series of informal gatherings in the space around and among sources of knowledge. So, in the initiation description of the page, it says, "Let us taste from life by telling trees. Let us build a life telling trees, from our ancestors to our contemporaries, planting seeds, building soils for the ones yet to come." So it's basically this idea. She was thinking about, you know, this gathering where you tell stories, where you learn, unlearn in stories. And also it's interesting to think of the fireplace, like who was sitting there, you know, who was allowed to sit there and share a story. And so just to give you an anecdote, like in one of these sessions of Telling Trees, Arlecci started by asking the participants who came, like be it artists that presented something or visitors, how do you greet your family? How is your family greeting, or your friends? And then I was thinking about this, like my mom, she's from the Philippines, and when she calls me, and she's never asking me, "How are you?" She's just, "Hello, what did you eat? What did you do?" As if, you know, giving birth to me was enough. And I don't have to, like, she's not interested in how I feel, or, yeah. Anyway, so, yeah, it means, sorry? Yeah. She wouldn't care. She's like, "Yeah, right, I don't care. What do you eat there in Hong Kong?" Yeah. Yeah. So also unlearning, you know, like as Elsa already mentioned, with the summer school with 40 people, and I would say exhaustion is a momentum that we love to play with. So we have programs that are for 3 days, like similar to this program, but we start around 4 and we end around 12, and we have poetry, music, scholars coming, and after 9 hours, you're really exhausted. You're just full. But, you know, that's the interesting momentum, because it's quite easy, not easy, I mean, it's beautiful to gather around and be in nice clothes, clean, fed, and to kind of like read something out that you're working on like the night before in your hotel room, or 2 months of research. But, you know, the people that we're actually talking about and the conditions, I mean, they don't come from this comfortable place, you know. And what happens when you're actually saturated, exhausted? How do you confront all this? I think, Emma, you were mentioning this, like the world is literally burning, you know, like how do you act from this uncomfortable zone? So I think this is a momentum that's very important for us to create it. And I think Elsa was very successful in creating this uncomfortable zone where for 5 weeks, 7 days a week, we had 40 people that were also completely exhausted because they were just slamming the whole program with workshops, contributions, all sorts of things. So there was not really this momentum of like exchange as well, I would say, and processing. We were just like super compressed. And I think every person who started speaking in the last week started like crying and sobbing, and then anyway, so I would say this uncomfortable zone is a very important zone to start from, when we think about unlearning.
I think before we include everybody else in the conversation, although well, you can certainly like jump here as well. But I would like to include Emma to this question, because when we started like giving a shape to this project, and Kinshasa was happening, and Hong Kong was happening, and then we had this idea of like how to transfer as much possible knowledge, and people was obviously like the way to transfer that knowledge through these different places, and then that largely failed because of like the visa reasons, because we were also having like two artists and people who were part of or close to the workshops that were happening in Kinshasa that then would have then participated in the workshops at Parasite as well. And then there was also the experience of the speakers of like Emma and Simon, who's not here with us. But alongside that, and I know this is like a very complicated question, but like how do you see that sort of like the dynamic in the exchange that happened in Kinshasa, both among the speakers and among the workshop participants, and also like how it was happening here, as you attended some of the workshops, even if they're still in the midst of it. So it would be great to hear a little bit your thoughts on that before we ask the others. But also you as well, so not just Emma. So
I think the biggest thing in Kinshasa was the language barrier. As a non-French speaking person, I wished I could have built stronger exchanges, relationships, and that was my only thing. But I definitely was well on board with the exhaustion thing. So 40 hours of travel to get there for 3 days of conference, and then 40 hours of travel back. I get that. Kinshasa was the most amazing way to just take everything and throw it out the window because Kinshasa was a world unto itself, and it blew my mind so much. And I think that's so important. And I completely commend Sevi for taking that step, to take that dialogue to Kinshasa, to bring us there. I feel so privileged to have had the opportunity to be here and Kinshasa, but that it worked. I'm now connected with lots of people on Facebook who do things like say happy birthday to my dad. So I definitely, and I was saying to Bonaventura one night that we were there when we had the musicians play an amazing Kinshasa art studios. I mean, that moment, you can't even, it was so special. The music that they were producing was phenomenal, the sound. So those moments, they changed my thinking, and I think those things are so important. Absolutely. I feel, Hong Kong's so easy in comparison. But that's my thoughts. Thank you.
Should I move into maybe a question I've been thinking about since planning the whole conference as well as for the workshops. So like we just talking about this collaboration and also to rethink about what just happened in Kinshasa, in Berlin. So I think this is great because we're always, resurfing all the memories, all the histories, although it just happened very quickly. And this is also what I'm also thinking about. How should I frame this? This way of unlearning, because I think in one of the posts or one of the designs from Savi is like a slogan: unlearning is not forgetting. We're always remembering, re-looking at what we have just talked about. And now this is kind of one of my answers to this self-reflective question I want to share with all of you is this conference. This is what's happening right now. How, like, what do you think, what do you think this means to you in terms of, let's say, because I think a lot of people on the stage right now, you're teaching or you're also going to deliver what you just presented to other people, to your students, to the kids. So I want to pass this mic to everybody to think about. We can do popcorn style. So yeah, what does this mean to you? So you don't have to be like one by one, because it's like popcorn. Yeah. Yeah. Also, as someone coming from education, public programming perspective, I think we always have to think about the influence, the next step of what we're thinking, what we're talking right now.
Okay. Well, in fact, I've never talked about what I talked today in at my university, and I'm not blaming my university for the course design and everything, but I feel probably what I'm doing or my research or my other practices should not be only limited in the institution, or whether they provide me an opportunity to do that or not. But I think it's well. I think it's also important because also nowadays so many art projects are also research-based. And so primarily as a researcher, I also feel this urge to break this boundary of institution or academia and to, of course, know more about what this topic is, how important this topic is for a larger public and audience. And so in this process, I think, of course, learning and unlearning is going on, and especially in terms of methodology and also, disciplinary boundaries. So I think for, how to say, I think through this project, my own research, I think there's a lot of things to unlearn because, for example, I didn't know before I started this project that the monument in Chongqing was not dedicated to the Liberation War. And if I ask anyone else, even in Chongqing, they might not know. But that knowledge is so deeply, and we take it for granted. And I think we also mentioned this idea of naturalization. And unlearning, I think, is exactly driving at this naturalization of history, of memory, of things that we learned in school. And so So everything, you know, or no matter it's artwork or other spheres, are great places for us to unlearn, and I think it's a long-term thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I work in an institution. My sole function in life is to teach students, and I think there is something that I unlearn, because I also think that we speak from a position of privilege, and I think there is something that we have to unlearn about our privilege as. And again, I'm neither a curator nor an artist, so I'm an educator, but as an artist, as a curator, as in part of this sort of public eye that we are in, I unlearn my privilege from my students. Many of them who can't afford rent, many of them who go hungry in the part of the world that I live in the Bay Area, where it's so expensive, but they still come to class. So I think there is something not just about teaching, but also our privilege that we have to unlearn when we participate in these projects. So I'll keep it short.
I think knowledge doesn't exist in a vacuum, and I think a lot of this talks today I felt would really help me in the way that I think about or sift through what I need to unlearn or decolonize. And I think this idea of decolonization being almost, you know, it's a term that's been used again and again, what we talked about, but it feels like still labor, really hard labor when you get up and do it every day. And it's like a lump in your throat and you have to sift through. And I think it's important to remember that unlearning is really hard. And it's something that we have to be faced with every day.
You pass it. Are we now? Is it okay if we go? You can break the cycle. Okay, we continue. So I would second everything that you said. I would think responsibility is a big thing as well, to acknowledge like the position that institutions, educators have. But I would say something that's a bit overseen as well is the notion of care. Like, first of all, caring for the team, see that the team is all right, because, yeah, in these 40 weeks of exhaustion, when you have, yeah, 4 weeks, I mean, you know, like having to be alert from 6 a.m. to 1 a.m. and like running up and down. I mean, I think, Anqi, you're super happy. You say it with love, but you say bye to us on Wednesday. I think, anyway, so I think care is something very important. That's why I think it's beautiful to have these moments of exchange and not to be lazy. I think that's why our artistic director is just not tired to exhaust us and to propose new projects, to propose collaborations, because it's very important to be out of the nutshell. And I think it's one of the beautiful and also hard processes as a curator, to not only work with the usual suspects that do amazing work, but to kind of like dig deep and to see, okay, who else is out there doing amazing work on this and this and that. And yeah, I stay with care. I would say.
I think my part of unlearning is to just give the mic and not take speaking time, because I feel I've spoken already a lot.
Well, also I'm covered. I mean, I'm just going to add one small sentence: the dependencies of care, and how do you choose to be dependent to others? I think that can also be a form of care, and to also admit that dependency is not necessarily a bad thing, and it presupposes collaboration. So I think that's what's interesting for me.
I don't teach, and I am very eager to learn from other people and other species. And I've never quite liked this term, unlearning, maybe because of the this kind of bad connotations in like Slavic languages. It's unlearning is now it rhymes quite a lot with the rhetoric of the new right, like far right populism. This until intellectual rhetoric, but I know what it means. I don't like this unlearning thing because it has this connotation of unlearning. You have to unlearn your bad manners, you know, like yeah. It's like it's always has this thing. Yeah. So I really like the term deschooling. It's because it has like this optimistic anti-institutional undertone, and as we have used a lot of prefixes for the last day. There's like re, di, an. Today I would like to propose miss as miseducation, misuse, misbehavior. So yeah, that's the optimistic thing.
Yeah, kind of difficult to summarize all, but I would like to. It just remind me of like Jimi Hendrix actually. It's like the point of experience, and how it was also when Anqi and Cosmin was contacting me about school, Bauhaus and stuff. For me, it's like maybe it's how this is like a really important moments. Looking at our generation now, try to reconstruct our school, how we learn from each other, and how we kind of make boundaries more fluid in that sense. So yeah, there is so many currencies that's happening here for me that I cannot translate to a certain value. So yeah, I also don't like the term of I like the school. That was a good proposal. That was a good proposal. Because for me personally, I always learn wherever I am from the experience that I have.
Yeah, there's a lot of things running through my head. One of them is this idea of vocabularies and that go too quickly. Coming from it's always strange to be situated in the center, like within an institution now. I've operated always outside of them, and now to be inside, there is this sense of what my friend Renan from the Philippines, she talks a lot about the sense of belatedness, that when you arrive to this center, when you're on this stage, you're running kind of 2 steps behind, and then all of these vocabularies go past so quickly that you don't have time to digest, and there is this exhaustion and this running after and this consumptive feeling, which often ends up in real illness. I guess the way that, and these like frictious vocabularies when we argue when we're actually saying the same thing, but I think this living or there's a temporal quality to unlearning or deschooling, and I think that's the number one thing that I find challenging. It's to skip in time to the way the discourse is accelerating, and sometimes you just don't have time to digest. And I think the number one form of care for me is to slow down and to allow people to process in their own time, because these are difficult things that we're discussing, and yeah, they're bones that are difficult to digest in the stomach. So it's a matter of slowing down and allowing myself, I think I can only speak from my position, but yeah, allowing myself the comfort of being belated, of perhaps not skipping to the same time.
Yeah, I'd rather be sitting there and looking out here than the other way around. Um, so I learned a lot. I'm very grateful for being here. Just the sheer presence in itself, it's something impossible to replicate in many other ways. I'm very grateful, and I'm also sensing a certain absences that I wish I could transmit or have brought with me, or would have had chances to conjure them or invoke them or evoke them in some ways. But at the same time, other creatures, composites and singular and multiple, came in ways that it will really stay with me for the next phase, as I go to bed, and then rise up again, fall asleep. Uh, you know, remember the tastes I had here, the sweat, the smell. And then at the same time, I'm also thinking about a particular paradox, a contradiction, that of course it's very welcome, which is on the one hand, I was so moved by the invocations of the ancestors and the monuments, some of which are oppressive, heavy, large-scaled, and but I could also see myself in them, in the sense that it's just only either a generation ago that mounted them, or maybe another generation not so long ago, to the extent that, of course, the youth riots that are going on globally at this very moment, in fact, oppose themselves to the acts that my current generation has done. So in their eyes, in fact, we have erected monumental catastrophes that prevent life for them, or life forms to emerge as we have experienced them. By we, I mean the history of the present. So, so there is a particular difficulty in entirely enjoying this moment, as delicious as it is, because it also hints to its own limits in trying to work out ways of surviving at the same time by adding to that which is already prohibiting that very same survival. So, of course, here I am speaking about it, but I have no song to suggest to surpass it entirely. It's going to have to be a whole library and volume. So I don't think there's one single term, prefixes or not. You cannot have enough footnotes to footnote it. Maybe not even ancestors are going to be enough. There have to. So it's not a question of agreement or disagreement or enjoying, or I think there's another kind of attitude, liquidity or solidity that is required, that cannot simply be transmitted in the forms that we know today. So it's simply I am invoking a possibility of acknowledgement of complicity in the violence that we already are fighting against. And so it's a difficult task because it's marking and demarking our same body at the same time. And so, yeah, it's I don't know how else to express it other than saying that I'm grateful, and also, of course, stimulated and inhabited by many souls that I have met on the screens, in the air, oculary or otherwise. I had to think of a friend who made a film about a gecko, and how the gecko always thinks that we are walking upside down because the gecko is going up. So yeah, a lot of these ideas came up as the presentations went by. So it's wonderful to also remember that a lot of ideas that we are thinking that are new, in fact, have traveled, have been there, that there are genealogies to them. And so that in the moments of celebrations, there's also a certain kind of inherent mourning, which is not negative per se, but another substance, another, the words are not enough.
I think about the 3 years that I spent as a lecturer, and I was so bad. I was a terrible lecturer. But if you were my lecturer, Sugata, man, I love the turkey. I've realized that I've been aware of the turkey for so long in different ways, but you brought the turkey to the front of my consciousness. The hyper-real turkey. I guess it's sort of kind of basic to say, but being a mother means that I think it's the greatest equalizer, that when I receive my child after school and she comes home and I cook for her and we wash and go to bed and I pass out at 9 p.m. with her. I mean, there's so much unlearning that goes related to your privilege and what you think is important when you have to have conversations with a 5-year-old child. And I think it keeps me very grounded, and it reminds me what is important, how I have to be smarter around my time and energy and care levels. And so, as simple and primitive as it sounds, it's my kind of constant reminder.
Well, there are many overlaps with School of Learning that I'm doing. It's not just because in Malaysia, I'm not just a practicing artist. I also do many other things. I also talked about design and zines in a different way. So I think as an artist, especially when I put on a hat as a visual artist, I think the space that is allowed for this kind of discussion is highly privileged. So I'm always questioning when we are proceeding with discourse about unlearning or relearning, is it always necessary for artists to be an artist when we are talking about these ideas? Because most of the time, when artists, maybe this is context specific, right? Most of the time when artists work with people in the region, the artist's name is always credited, right? And I find that itself is problematic when an artist can work with the people or with the community without actually producing an art. So in that sense, maybe community art or art that engage with people can take a different form that is not necessarily contemporary art or other kinds of things.
I teach in a professional school of architecture where the pedagogy has historically been defined by exhaustion, like where you get extra points for how many all-nighters you pull and how exhausted you are, and I often find myself really in this kind of existential crisis where, like, during more kind of like nihilistic moments, I often wonder why we're teaching our students, why are we wasting our students' time teaching them about HVAC systems and, even about the history of architecture. Why are we training our students to design the world when we should really be training them to burn it down? And I guess I'm also thinking that, events like this have really reminded me that there's also a kind of exhaustion that I think is maybe not necessarily productive, but is generative of a really really thoughtful conversations, of really transformative kinds of ideas. And I think that's what I really value about events like this, which are not that kind of standard academic format in which, you know, you write an abstract, the abstract becomes a paper, the paper is delivered at a kind of beauty contest or, you know, academic conference where everyone gets up on stage and flosses for like 15 minutes. And then you turn that paper into an article or a chapter in a book, and then you get tenure based on how many things you produced. So I'm just kind of wondering whether it's not possible to have more events like this, which which are not sort of product driven, and whether maybe part of unlearning is also unlearning our students that the goal is not to produce a product, is not necessarily to produce a building, but to look at the world in a more critical, transformative way. I didn't mean that literally about burning down the world. Yeah, I know. It doesn't need any.
So we should open to questions from the audience now, and we should have at least 2 questions from the participants in our workshop. So at least 2 questions from the group, and otherwise we don't go to dinner until that happens. But yeah, any other questions besides those? Okay, so then we move to the participants. Come on. Great, first one.
I guess I'd like maybe Clara to say a little bit more about what you're talking about allowing yourself to be belated. Because I'm thinking like we're here in the context of emerging professionals, and it's like, what are we emerging into, or where are we emerging towards, if we're like recontextualizing or reconceptualizing these ideas of the future. And it's like, I find what you're saying about belatedness really liberating, but then how does it resituate or maybe help us to relearn this context in which we're all relating to each other as well?
I mean, yeah, now that you mentioned the emerging, maybe it would be fun to have like belated professionals. But yeah, I think it's like this idea of slowness. It's study takes time, and at some point we were talking about the study. I think with Lawrence, you asked a question about like the studio and the structure of the studio, and then we brought it back to like this idea of study, and to like there is one sentence that I've been thinking about for 3 years. And I know the people who wrote the sentence, and so I had like this access to the people who wrote it, and like, oh, I find it really interesting. It's a sentence that speaks to me. I understand it, but not fully. And it's been 3 years since and I just understood it last week. And it takes a while to really digest. And yeah, I guess my frustration is one of vocabulary. When things are reaching you at like this remove, especially if you're not located in a center of cultural production, and centers and peripheries are contested locations. But with Shugata, we were talking in a cigarette break that, I mean, you can say all you want that center and periphery doesn't exist, but it's kind of like God, who I personally don't believe exists, but God has real effects. So if you're not located in this hyper-real center, the God zone, yeah, that's in this God zone, like then you're pressured, and by the time the word reaches you, everybody else is like throwing it away, and it was like, oh no, but it was a good word. It was a really good word, and maybe you guys didn't figure it out, but let us have our thing with it. And let us dive deep into the word and take it apart and put it back together. And it's not the word that's at fault. It's the way that we misuse them. And we tire of them so easily. And it's like this faithfulness. As a writer, I guess, like I feel like this faithfulness to words. And I would, yeah, taking the time to really understand something. One sentence can take 3 years. And that should be a timeline that is allowed.
The second question?
Hi. This question's for anyone who wants to answer it. And it's related to professionalism and unschooling, and how like professional arts careers and unschooling, I think, are sort of sometimes contradictory, or like as you sort of try to be strategic about your arts professional career, it's hard to unschool or like decolonize, which is a word I also agree sort of like breaks my heart about how like insincere, unserious people use it. Like, how do you negotiate that, I guess, as you like become more professional in like curatorial work or academic work in a way that sort of like pivots you away from like the communities you work for towards like white institutions? Like, you know, how do you negotiate that?
I guess one of the ways to do it is to actually to learn about other things, because when I teach in a classroom, I always question that if students can be itself a repository of knowledge, because the moment we bring in when lecturers, tutors, or curators bring in knowledge into a platform, there is a certain didacticism in it, but most of the time, a classroom is itself a situation, and it shouldn't be prescribed, right? Whatever that's learned in a classroom, it shouldn't be prescribed. And I say this because I noticed that a lot of lecturers or teachers, when they go into a classroom, they would sometimes ignore the question of students just to finish their slides. So they can get it done. So the slides becomes more important. The presentation slides become more important than actually responding to the students. So responding to the students then take place outside of the classroom. But I feel that conversations and dialogues, because knowledge is it's a product of conversations. So the slides should be abandoned, while conversation should take place within the classroom, because the classroom is where knowledge is being constructed through these conversations.
I just have a comment. I think just make your work. You know, Ileana talked about building the counter narrative, and I think we're in a time where we can create the work that we want to make. And I guess this thing with lo-fi is like, if you can do it lo-fi, imagine what happens when you get given 100 grand, which is just the number I pulled out my ass. But, if you want to make shows, do a show in a shop, do a show in a laundromat. The reason I'm 37 and I have 80 exhibitions behind me is that I've been doing this for 15 years, and I've done a lot of dogs, like a lot of shows which are like, let's unlearn that show. But you learn so much by just fucking doing it. But also it's exhaustion, and you go to a place where you do learn a lot through exhaustion. I just opened this gallery, and as a startup, I have to go so hard all the time. I have decided to produce a show a month. And so I'm 5 months in, and we're opening our 6th show in 2 weeks. But I have an amazing community around me who pull it together. We don't spend any money on advertising. We write our own content. We make our own publications. And we're writing our own art history, because the Academy don't care. So we're creating our own counter-narrative. And I mean, as a curator now who has been doing this for a while, I look at young professionals or emerging professionals and see that energy, and I want to be part of that energy. Like, that drive to not wait for someone to give you permission is really exciting to me. yes, have the courage to just do your own thing.
I just wanted to follow up on what you said, because it's really interesting to think of that, of the emerging curator versus a curator that has experience, and what the lo-fi that Carla said, with the big institutions, the big museums, and the very small institutions. And I personally find that this lo-fi is not low at all, actually, because they have been plundering you know, the systems and the way that small institutions work, or what they talk about. So it's very much it's what you described exactly, this type of envy in a good way, of wanting to have this freshness and this energy. The bad part of it is that you're usually underpaid or not paid. But I mean, it's an interesting correlation to think, because I thought it was a very interesting way that you put it, but for me there's nothing low in it. Yeah.
I mean, we do low fidelity. I'm a lo-fi lover. So, and also I'm actually more along the lines of like hyper productive. But it's just this idea that between all of the kind of desperate energy, that the rest is also part of the work, and the food and the have you eaten, and all of that is like part of this nourishing process. So I think we're all kind of in different parts, maybe, of this like thing, like this weird timeline. But yeah, we're all one fluffy organism, I guess. Yeah.
Questions? Yeah.
Yes. Maybe there's some answers about this question that were in the first project that Xavi organized in relation to the first Bauhaus or non-Bauhaus event that you did. But when Lupe was speaking and following other papers and presentations, I was trying to actually not demonize Gropius and trying to understand that in a moment of Bauhaus and this invitation that the curriculum that Gropius did establish, of trying to think of an artist in a different way, that really was in a way in control of the forms of production, or took part in the forms of production of society. Obviously, this is in a major macro engineering of society, but a lot of the presentations, including Lupe's school, is a clear example of taking control of the forms of production, no? In different ways of thinking, not of the product, as you were saying, about the product of, in academia, there are products of industry, but products of, in the way that Lupe was saying, not being another manager, but owning the narrative of the history of hip hop or of rap. And I think that in many cases, yeah, there is something to learn from things that, in, I don't know, in the specific, yeah, the Gropius imagery of what was the artist in society, as what was those intentions. I invoked or mentioned Xavi because I just wanted to know if in those, I'm curious if in the first project that happened, like how was anything this debated, and in general to all the speakers, if at any point was like, how do you literally do relate the whole criticality towards Bauhaus? Yeah, I know this is a larger question.
So, I mean, Gropius, yeah, I think also even in the spinning triangles concept, you know, we don't say like, oh, Bauhaus was all bad, but I think the history about it, as in many design and many kind of movements in design history, etc., are very mono. Yeah, there's just a lot of
Sebastian.
stuff. Ciao, bye, Sebastian.
Bye-bye.
No. Yeah, now I don't know how to continue where I was. No, yes, so, you know, there is just a lot of stuff hidden when we talk about Gropius. I think, you know, Gropius is one of these figures, you know, that everybody thinks they know who he was, but actually there's so much that, you know, we don't talk about when we talk about him and about the Bauhaus in general. You know, like talking about Johannes Itten, for instance, which he employed, who very much marked the first phase of the Bauhaus, who clearly was very racist. And we don't really talk about it. I think, you know, there are many things that we also need to talk about. I think that's more the point, and not stay with that narrative that somehow we know. And this is true for many design histories. I mean, actually talking about body markings and, you know, Van der Velde, for instance, there's something called the Congo style, for instance, that he was very influenced by. There's a lot of story there to also uncover. And I think, yeah, I think that's one of the points. Is like design history actually needs to be rewritten, I think.
Sorry, it's please excuse my answer, but I really could care less about Gropius, and I could care less about Bauhaus, and I think we should care more about us being the ancestors of our kids, who are, you know, in the future responsible for de-erecting these horrific monuments that we, helped building. And I think it's a very, very hard process, but I think we should do it with pleasure and do it together. And I think, therefore, it's very beautiful to come together and connect and think about our work and focus more about us and not about all these dead white men.
Well, on that note, yes. I think we can close the conference. Well, thank you, everyone who came here, and yeah, thank you, and let's go and eat.